Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Miao Yu, and I'm a Participant Relationship Manager for Asia Pacific at the United Nations Global Compact, the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. Today, we're presenting Rebuilding Resilience through Sustainable Finance in Asia Pacific. And it's my honor to introduce our speakers. Our moderator for today is Ms. Marie Morris, who is the head of Sustainable Finance at the United Nations Global Compact. Marie will first present on the concept and objectives of the recently launched CFO Taskforce for the SDGs, and how can companies incorporate sustainable finance practices into their daily work and business operations. Our second presenter is Ms. Marika Stocker from the Global Compact Network Singapore. Marika has 10 years of experience in investment banking, consulting, and intergovernmental organizations. She is the co-author of a recently launched report, Closing the SDG Financing Gap in ASEAN. Great to have you, Marika. I'm also honored to welcome our two panelists who will join us for a moderated panel discussion. Mr. Sam Ong, the CFO at Vina Energy from Singapore. Sam joined Vina Energy in 2018, and prior to joining the company, he held regional and global leadership positions with responsibilities ranging from investment, treasury, risk, planning, project financing, and M&A. Welcome, Sam. Also joining the panel discussion, we have Mr. Gabriel Eickhoff, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lastery Capital, also from Singapore. He has been leading work in the climate and forestry sector in Southeast Asia since 2005. He specializes in creating market-driven solutions to conservation, ecosystem restoration, and community forestry initiatives. Welcome to our speakers and panelists. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel located on the bottom of your screen. We will address your questions at the end. We also have some graduates from the Global Compact Network Singapore's Advanced Certificate in Sustainability and Sustainable Businesses joining us today. Congratulations on completing your course, and we hope you continue to embrace your sustainability learning journey with the UN Global Compact. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Marie from the UN Global Compact.
Many thanks, Simia, for the very kind introduction and for introducing us today. Looking forward to the panel. But if you bear with us for the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to start by giving you a bit more background about the CFO Taskforce, which was recently launched. So if we move to the next slide, I'll provide some context as well. And then we'll have my colleague Marika Stocker introducing the report, also recently launched, specifically looking at corporate finance and the advancements of that in the APAC region. And the last sort of half an hour, 20 minutes will be, I hope, a lively conversation with Sam and Gabriel, who've recently joined the task force. So just to kind of highlight a few things first around what we call the CFO task force. I can see on the chats that we've been joined by a lot of people from many different countries, you know, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Southeast Asia. It's great to have such a diverse audience, and I hope you found the webinar interesting. So the task force was launched about a year ago, actually just a year ago, in December 2019. It's called the task force because it's really focusing on, so for a 2 to 3 years program to engage companies, large and small, on channeling investment towards the SDGs. So hopefully everyone's familiar with the SDGs. That's really how we're kind of contextualizing the whole resilience conversation that's going to take place today on this webinar, and looking at future proofing our future and financing our future. So the task force was actually sort of picked up on from the Wall Street Journal. So we have, and there's a few banks, there's a few representatives from the finance sector today, but really to show that as a group of companies, and we have up to 40 now, I'll come back to that in a minute. If we move to the next slide, that would be great. So as a group of 40 companies and plus and growing, this has really been mainstream now at the Wall Street Journal level, within the kind of finance sector directly. So it's no longer sustainability on the side, but it's really looking at how do you integrate the SDGs from a corporate sort of standpoint. So those are kind of a few facts around the task force. I'm not going to go through everything, but just to kind of show you what it is that we're doing. So it's an initiative by the UN Global Compact. As I said, it's co-hosted by two companies for now. One, which is an energy company called NL. So the CFO of NL sort of help us, sort of steering the group, as well as the CIO, so the Chief Investment Officer of US Core Strategy of PIMCO. So we also have an investors at the table. And this is what we're going to try to replicate here with the panel with Sam and Gabrielle, to have the corporate perspective, and also, of course, the sort of kind of connection to the global markets and investors sort of side of things. So for us, really important to have the two represented at the table. As I said, it was launched in December 2019, although here it says launch in September 2020. We're talking about the actual principles, so the guidance that we've issued in the first years of the task force. I'll come back to that in a second. We work not just with hopefully the usual suspects of the US market, the European markets, but we really want this to be a truly global initiative. So we've been having conversations with our colleagues, of course, here in Singapore, in Malaysia, Sam Ong from Vena Energy and Gabriel Erkoff from Leicester Capital have just joined us as our latest members of the task force. So we really want to grow this as a truly global initiative. Some of my team member, actually Nicolo is here on the call today. There's 6 of us, so if you want to work with us, let us know, because we're growing. And just a bit more on the content. The objective really is to mainstream corporate finance and understand how corporate finance can be steered towards the SDGs. So if you had to summarize this kind of conversation and presentation in one sentence, it would be about applying an SDG lens to corporate investments, and really from a CFO and corporate sort of perspective. So I think what we'll hear is that investors are more and more expecting corporates to be ready, to be future ready for those on environmental, social, and governance issues, and this is really what we're helping companies doing by sort of steering and producing guidance around this. So we have working groups that are looking specifically at the strategy, the financial instruments. So what we mean by that is potentially, like, for example, a green bond or sustainability bond, and also the actual reporting of those activities. So there's a bit of a chain going throughout, which we promote, as a step-by-step approach, and I know Marika will touch on that as well. So if it feels like a lot today, in terms of either you're a CFO or you're from a corporate and you're thinking, I want to start sort of understanding what I can do in terms of aligning with the SDGs, this is a start, and we provide that guidance. So thanks. If we can move to the next slide. So everything I've just mentioned is available on our website. You can actually sort of access it from anywhere. It's free. So if we move to the next slide, just to kind of introduce the principles. So when we sat down a year ago with the few companies that at the time were part of the task force, and now have grown to 40 plus. And when I say 40, we have big names like Danone, Unilever, Tesco, NL, but also sort of smaller entities. So we really want to open up to not just not just the large multinationals, although of course, they are listed on capital markets, so they have access to a certain type of capital, but we also talk about impact investing as part of the task force. So anyway, when we sat down with this group of company, I think the first thing that we were kind of thinking about is, how do we provide guidance that kind of creates a common language for all of us? Because even though everyone is a CFO at the table, they all come, every single member comes from a slightly different perspective, different sector, different geography, different personal experience. So that was really the whole idea of coming up with this set of principles. And when we meet principles, it's not legally binding or mandatory in any way. It's really guidance to help CFOs and companies to integrate some of those aspects into their day-to-day work. So the guidance or the principles is actually a document of a few pages that is available and downloadable. And what we're now helping companies to do, not just the 40 that are part of the task force, is to start implementing some of those principles or guidance within the operation. So we're doing that, if we could move to the next slide. Thanks. We're doing that through 4-step sort of processes. So one is sort of looking at how to integrate impact thesis and measurements. So what do we mean by that? In a nutshell, it's really looking at sort of your business operations to identify positive and negative impacts. So this is really the perspective that we want to kind of push for companies to think about. And linked to that, of course, is the actual strategy, the overall strategy and investment. So what kind of investment can we implement to drive and integrate this strategy? So those two principles, or those two recommendations, if you like, are grouped under one working group. So if you were going to join us today, let's say, you would be part of the CFO group. So that leads the strategy and kind of act as a board for the initiative. But also we would ask you to nominate your colleagues to be part of the working groups that are really driving the guidance and the thought leadership around those 4 issues. Number 3 is around integrated corporate SDG finance. So what do we mean by that? I touched on it earlier. It's around promoting financial instruments that are linked to the SDGs. So SDG linked finance. I'll come back to that in a second. There's a couple of slides that I want to show you around the trends on that. It's been really growing over the last few months. So hopefully we're in the right space, and we want to encourage that in every part of the globe as well. And then number 4 is around the communication to investors and reporting. I can see some questions around the SDGs, and I'm sorry, I should have maybe started with that, just assuming that everyone does. That's typical of me, I'm sorry. The SDG is a Sustainable Development Goals. So it's basically a framework that was established by the UN in 2015 that is sort of going to be completed by 2030. So it's a set of 17 goals over the next, I guess now, 9 years. That it's really like a business plan, if you like, for humanity in terms of responding to the challenges that we face and looking at sort of various goals. So look it up if you want on the UN sort of website as well. But it's basically a set of goals and criteria that was built up and developed by sort of the UN, but also 500 different companies from different sectors. So that's what the SDGs are. And I'm sorry for using the acronym. Thank you for sharing the link. So the fourth thing is really sort of around once you've kind of thought about integrating those issues, like the environment and social aspects into your strategy, and you're also kind of thinking, we want to kind of steer our strategy towards this as a company. We want to kind of, when we're seeking for new capital to grow, we want that kind of capital to have an SDG lens applied to it, or sustainability lens applied to it. And then it's like, how do we then report about those activities to investors? And so that's what the number 4 is looking at. So how do we actually help companies create a narrative that resonates with the investors? So I'll move on to the next few slides, which are going to give you a bit of more context on sort of the trends and so on. But this is the kind of approach that we are recommending companies to take. And I won't go too deep into this because I know Marika will touch on that as well. But those at the top you have sort of the kind of steps that I've just highlighted. So it moves from identifying impact theses to actual measurements, then to integrated strategy, investment process, and so on. I'm sure you can read as well as I can, but this is really to give you an idea of the flow that we expect companies to think about when they embark on their journey. We also recognize that not everyone is at the same sort of level on their journey. So of course, not only we welcome companies who are from different sizes, different sectors, but also at different steps in the journey. We really don't want it to be an issue if people feel like they're not yet sort of at that stage of thinking about the SDG. We just had some examples on the chat of people who might just be sort of starting thinking about this. So it's a journey. It takes time, but equally we don't have such a huge amount of time to sort out some of those issues that we're faced with as human species. So this is really going to have to create the urgency and mobilize the corporate sector around those issues. Thanks. Let's move to the next one. Great. So I won't spend too much time on this. This is really just to highlight, the four principles and the 3 working groups that we've implemented and that you would join if you were part of the task force. Thanks, Simia. If you could kindly move to the next one. Yeah, and then the next after that. Great, brilliant. So just to finish, because I think we also want to hear from Marika and our speakers, but I just want to kind of set up the scenes. 3 slides to highlight what's going on in terms of specifically sustainable finance globally. So I know Marika will add a little bit about the regional localization of this. So 3 slides to kind of highlight what's going on in terms of financial instruments linked to the SDGs. So what we've seen is that there's a growing scope of proceed bonds. So what we mean by proceed bonds is that there are bonds that are actually linked to the strategy of the companies. So there's so green bond funding has increased for a variety of purposes. So you can see it's not just sort of usual renewable projects, but it could be sort of raising capital around sustainable water, or it could be pollution prevention, or something we'll touch on with Gabriel on sustainable forestry and agriculture and zero deforestation and commodities. So definitely, what we've seen is an increase in the scope of proceed bonds, including the various themes that are now covered with use of proceeds bonds. So many companies have actually been issuing those bonds recently. And if we move to the next slide, I'll touch on two more things. One is, and again, for everyone new to this or even not so new, sustainability bond standards. So in parallel to companies issuing sort of more and more bonds and different financial instruments, but we're focusing on bonds here. There's a set of standards that are also being developed, both from a European Union perspective, but not just that. For example, ICMA, the International Capital Market Association, is also developing sort of a sustainability bond sort of set of principles, actually sustainability linked bond principles. So they're interested. We're working really closely with them. What we're trying to do is not to replicate what other initiatives are doing. So we're not at the task force, we're not creating standards. We're just here to really help companies implement those standards and follow guidance. So just to make you aware of those bond standards that are available now, and more gearing towards sustainability linked bonds. So with user proceeds actually attached to performance of the target that's been issued by the company, with reward for investors and penalization for corporates if they're not actually delivering. So that's a new mechanism on the market, and it was initially actually launched as the first sustainability USDT linked bond was launched by Enel, the company that we work with, about a year ago, and it's been followed by many others, as you can see on the next slide, my final slide. So what we've seen is a boom of those sort of bond issuance over the last few months, and I'm sure as we're talking about sort of resilience, there is a link to, of course, sort of this year being a special, unprecedented year, in terms of managing a global pandemic. So what we've seen is really that surge of issuance of sustainability bonds, by a range of companies, and I can definitely, sort of see that continuing. So this is really where we are in terms of wanting to kind of highlight the task force, how it came about, what it does, what it would do if you were joining us sort of today, what the principles are about. So sort of 4 steps really that companies can take to implement those issues, and then some examples of the trends that we see on the market. So that's it for me for now. I'll be back in a short while, but I just want to pass on to Marika to give you a bit more of a flavor on closing this SDG, so Sustainable Development Goals, financing gap in Asia. So thank you so much, Marika.
Thank you very much, Marie. Hello, everyone. My name is Marika Stocker, and I work for the UN Global Compact Network here in Singapore. Simao, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So recently, GCNS published a report on how to close the SDG financing gap in ASEAN. The report was written for corporates and what they can do to contribute to sustainable finance activities in the region. The objective was to provide a practical guide which corporates can use to start with sustainable finance or bring their sustainable finance journey to the next level. The focus was on the more advanced markets in ASEAN, providing guidance around bonds and loans instruments. The authors of the report are myself, together with Russell Marsh from Ernst & Young, who was our collaboration partner for this project. We also received valuable contribution from Arabesque, DBS Bank, and ICMA. On the following slides, you will get an overview of the report and how it is aligned with the CFO Taskforce and the CFO principles, what Marie just described now. I will also touch base on how companies can be more resilient through sustainable finance. So to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, it is required to increase development financing from billions to trillions. At today's level, the SDG financing gap is $2.5 trillion in developing countries. There is evidence that investing in the SDGs makes economic sense. Achieving the goals could create 380 million new jobs and would result in savings of about 26 trillion by 2030. When we look at ASEAN, the investment need is $3 trillion until 2030. Of those 3 trillion investment need, the largest demand is in the infrastructure sector. Here, the volume of projects is shrinking since 2017. You can see that in the chart on the right side. In contrast, the demand for sustainable investment is rising and grew steadily over the last years. That's the blue line in the chart. That means that the demand for sustainable investments exceeds the supply of available projects in ASEAN. At the moment, available finance is not channeled towards sustainable development at the scale and speed required to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. So what can we do to close this gap? Evidence suggests that private capital can scale to the level needed to close the SDG financing gap, in combination with other sources of funding like blended finance, for instance. That means that corporates can play a vital role in providing supply for the growing sustainable investment demand. Generally speaking, private capital flows of debt and equity increases if the income level of a country rises. In countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, you have an active sustainable finance market already in place. Companies from those countries can tap those markets to issue sustainable bonds or loans. You can see the activity level of sustainability bonds in those countries in the left chart. We have seen a rapid growth in the green bond market over the last years, and new instruments like thematic bonds are growing since COVID. It is important to have this innovation in the market, as new products like the sustainability-linked loans or bonds, or also transition bonds, help to grow the market and hence broaden the available sources of sustainable funding for companies. When you look at the right chart, you can see that the sustainable bonds volume is still small compared to the total bonds volume in ASEAN. To be precise, it's less than 1%, so there's still a lot of room to grow for sustainability debt. Next slide, please. So if a company wants to be active in sustainable finance or has already issued a couple of transactions, here's what you can do to issue sustainable finance in the long term. The UN Global Compact has developed a roadmap for corporates on how to raise funds through corporate finance tools for the SDGs. The model supports moving companies from an isolated green finance activity to a sustainable finance approach on a corporate level. The model is also aligned with the recently published CFO principles from the CFO Taskforce. So in a nutshell, the model recommends to develop an impact theory which is set by KPIs and targets and is measurable on its sustainable impact. Once integrated into corporate governance, a company can issue general purpose SDG bonds or loans. That means that the proceeds of the transactions are not used for one specific sustainability project, like with the use of a proceeds bond, but the funds are intended to support the company's overall activities that contribute to the SDGs. That makes it easier for a company to issue sustainable finance instruments in the long term. These steps are described in more detail in the report. Next slide, please. As a next step, we looked at the important considerations for companies once they are ready to issue sustainable finance products. We reached out to different stakeholders in the region to get their view on what they think is important for companies to consider in terms of the sustainability aspects of sustainable finance transactions. DBS Bank contributed for the banking perspective, Arabesque provided the investor view, and IGMA functioned as the independent third party. The three sustainability aspects they recommended were the following. First, align your sustainability activities with international frameworks and regulations. On a global perspective, IGMA provides the green, social, and sustainable bond standards, including sustainability-linked bond principles. In Asia, the most used standards are from the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. They developed the green bond standards in collaboration with IGMA, using their green bond principles as the basic. The difference between these standards is that the ASEAN green bond standards aim to provide more specific guidance on how the green bond principles are to be applied across the region here. You can see from the chart that the ASEAN green bond standards are the most used standards over here. Second, conduct external reviews to verify your planned sustainability bond or loan. Issuers should conduct external reviews to verify if the planned sustainability transaction fulfills the criteria of the adopted guidelines and standards. Investors perceive it as important that the transaction is also reviewed by an external third party. And the third point was be transparent to investors by providing adequate disclosure and reporting. So companies can help investors to assess the investment risk by providing annual reports and other publications, and also by keeping a regular dialogue with them. Next slide, please. After all, we know that sustainable finance makes sense for companies in the long run to support the triple bottom line of planet, people, and profit. Sustainable finance makes not only sense from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial one. The pandemic showed us that sustainable finance instruments prove to be more resilient than other types of equity and debt. Green bonds, for instance, have outperformed all other types of debt in 2020, in particular since mid-July. Therefore, corporates and investors should seize this opportunity to walk a more sustainable recovery pathway, integrating ESG more strongly into their consideration matrix. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. That's already so much about the report. And if you're interested in this, you can scan the QR code on this page here now. Alternatively, the report is also published on the GCNS website and is available for everyone to download. I would like to hand over back to you, Marina.
Thanks so much, Marika. I think hopefully that brings some color to what's going on in the region, and we can come back to that. And of course, download the reports whenever you want. It's all available as well online for any of you to get access. So now, without further ado, I want to introduce our two panelists. I think they've already been introduced, but I just want to do that again because now you can see them. So we'll do the effect. So first, Sam Ong, who's the Chief Financial Officer of Vino Energy. So Sam, if you want to from online. Perfect. That's great. And branded as it is. So it's great to have you. And then Gabriel Ekhoff, co-founder and CEO of SDG Capital. So off you go here as if by magic. So that's brilliant. Welcome to this panel. So we're going to spend sort of, I think, about 20 minutes. I'm going to keep an eye on time because I did go a bit over, but I'm very passionate about all of this, as you can see. And I've got a set of questions that I'd like to go through with you, Sam and Gabriel. And of course, you know, we can go a bit off piste, make it interactive. We'll try to keep like 5 to 10 minutes at the end to also you know, sort of get the audience to Q&A with us. So thanks so much. So Sam, perhaps if we start with you, and as I said in my presentation earlier, what we're trying to kind of, you're both part of the CFO Taskforce, you know, recent members, which is brilliant to have, you know, Singapore companies represented at the table. Perhaps a little bit more about Vino Energy for those of us on the, or the people on the call who might not know what Vino Energy does, and then we'll dig in a little bit more about, you know, sort of on the SDGs and so on.
Yeah, thank you very much for the forum. And Vino Energy, you know, still a very young, fairly young company, but we do have an early start in Asia Pacific when it comes to the investment in renewable energy and the development of some of the very early national programs in this part of the world in Asia Pacific. And so I think collectively, since 6-7 years ago, I think we have been we have had a portfolio of renewable energy such as solar, wind, and battery energy storage systems assets producing over 11 gigawatts in operations, construction, shovel ready, and in development in our pipeline. And we are very proud of that critical mass and our platform to be a one key player in influencing what we can do, not just for the environment, but for the entire organization, and beyond that into our supply chain. So we are in some ways very young and quite a small one compared with where we want to get to, a renewable independent power producer.
Brilliant, thanks. And Gabriel, I'm going to do the same just so we can, you know, have a bit more interaction. Do you want to tell us about SDG Capital? When I spoke to you a few days ago, you were in the midst of, you know, coming up and writing your business plan for the next stage, and you know, it's exciting. What do you do?
So SDG Capital is a young company. We've been up and running informally since 2015 and formally since 2017 here in Singapore and in Indonesia. When you look at the space that we fill, a recent McKinsey report just pinned the total budget globally for conservation at being about 40% of the global expenditure on ice cream, right? And we sit in sort of the space between conservation and market making, and in collaboration with corporates. 40% of the global budget for ice cream is not sufficient to make, is not sustainable if we're looking at hitting our Paris targets and actually avoiding large scale deforestation problems. And so SDG Capital is a market making company that helps holds a portfolio of 50 projects, conservation programs on the ground in Indonesia, with a pipeline of another 50 coming beyond that. And these are all independent projects that we work with, and we bring these projects out and present them to the market in a way that the market can actually transact with them as though they were suppliers, so that corporates can begin to integrate these conservation programs as part of their supply chain and as part of their sourcing and procurement strategies into the products that they're creating, and integrate them into the commodities that are being produced, the commodities that are being used, into the products that we all use today. So the strategy for our company is really integration of conservation into markets.
So you're the bridge. That's fascinating. We'll come back to that. Really, really interesting. And I think, Sam, what I'd love to hear a bit more. I know you're a young, sort of company, but what we've heard and what we're hearing is that corporations are increasingly vocal about the SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals. Some focusing on one SDG, some aligning the whole corporate sort of strategy with the SDGs. What do you think are the implications this has on sort of actual strategies and business models? So what do you see, and maybe a bit for Vina Energy, but also in general, what do you see the trends on that?
Yeah, I think if we are transiting between the business models to our financial models, I think we see ourselves as a conduit, a small play, hopefully an exemplary one to be able to do what we have been doing in general, environmentally friendly businesses, solar, renewable energy, and incorporate that philosophy and internalizing the best practices of what's available into the day-to-day working from the ground up. And from a financial models angle, we feel that when we incorporated our philosophy into at all levels of the organization, including the investment committee, where we deploy funds in accordance to not just the renewable energy as an end channel to the funding, but also as to how we actually doing it. In addition to the equity shareholders support, we also are reaching out to the debt market, and we receive very, very good receptions from that, issuing a green bond right before the pandemic becoming a prevalent part of our daily lives in February, and that we're able to attract global investors in ways and means, and we believe some costing as well, that we were not able to do as a plain vanilla bond issuance at that given time. And we also enjoy not just the cost of it, but the diversification of our investors, plus the stability of the financial instrument. Given the volatility that we are talking about at this point, and it was 10 months ago that we have issued the green bond, arguably the first one in Singapore listed in SGX. Our secondary market pricing and is stable. Is basically at the par value at this point. So we feel that we obviously are able to connect the dots from doing well in our business models of being in renewable, but also attracting the financial communities wherever we serve in the breach here. So to us, we are very happy, obviously, to be a part of the CFO Taskforce, a well-organized whole thought process that we feel we are able to learn and incorporate into our own corporations, and in some ways influencing outside of the organization in our supply chain to do the same.
That's brilliant, and congrats on your green bonds. It's really exciting, and here's to many more. And I think I'd love to kind of bring Gabriel, bring you in at this particular juncture, because there's two things that I think resonates really well with what Sam was saying. One is around in the role that you have in bridging to global markets. What do you see sort of institutional investors looking for more and more in corporates, or the projects that you're helping sort of channeling to this market?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What we're seeing is we're seeing maybe for one of the first times an alignment between shareholder pressure and capital market pressure, with lining up not just inside of individual companies, but actually lining up across entire supply chains. And this is fascinating because it means that the market pressures to correct are happening far downstream, where they're close to consumers, and that's being passed up and up and up and up in the commodity sector, at least up and up and up and upstream, to right out into the forest and landscapes where commodities are being grown. And then an essential part of that narrative is not just decisions that are being made in the executive boardrooms and the shareholder rooms of the downstream corporates, but actually of the investors who are investing in these companies themselves, and what they are willing to accept, what they are requiring in order to mobilize debt capital, or actual new investment, not just impact investment, but institutional investment. And so we're seeing requirements for sustainable commodity certification. We're seeing requirements for zero deforestation demonstration, not just committing to zero deforestation, which most corporates have done, what most mainstream corporates have done in 2014, 2015 with the New York Declaration on Forests. But now now that it's 2020, the actual execution of these zero deforestation commitments. And so we're in a transition period now between making commitments and actually then executing on them. And we're seeing institutional investors bringing those commitments home and requiring them as part of the financing arrangements.
And so I guess there's a drive for sort of ESG implementation, so a true implementation, yes, and actual integration of those issues rather than just a commitment. I mean, we've seen that with other sort of issues as well at the Compact. For example, I was presenting yesterday at an event on women and gender diversity, and you're saying 68% of CEOs are actually committed to a wider sort of gender diversity, but only sort of, I think, half of the companies are actually showing that they're implementing that. So it goes, yes, across the spectrum. It's really interesting to hear more about the zero deforestation stuff, specifically. And Sam, I think on your end, without kind of saying you both work on specific SDGs, but I think you probably do a little bit. I'd love to hear more around sort of decarbonization and what do you think are the strategic benefits of integrating those considerations into financial models for companies or actual business models? What are the benefits? We have a captive audience of almost 200 people right now. What's the business case for this?
Well, I think we are in the business of renewable and environmentally friendly business as a start in general. I think in specific, and we feel that when we raise the money, for example, the green bond to finance our projects for growth, we feel the obligation, and I think we are committed to deploy the funds in a responsible way. And therefore, I think we feel that we want to take on the challenge of influencing our supply chain to incorporate some of the principles and some of the SDG goals that are in place in how we are doing our business and how they are responding to our requirements in doing their business in achieving the supply of renewable energy. So to us, we are able to not just we are able to basically put the purpose, right, of what we are doing every day to all of our employees, and that we're connecting the dots from our assets on the ground of how we actually construct and operate the plants, and how we actually procure the parts to make it happen, to how our partners and the local communities and the governments and the populations we serve to observe and to have the discipline to not just measure and observe, but also to really put in place the action plans to achieve the outcome of what we have set out to do in terms of the goals. And we feel that we feel that this is the only way we feel that we are able to do well, and that it is a great feeling to be able to do good in the meantime. So some of the benefits may not be immediate, but we feel that as there are more and more players and committed ones for the long term that are in the industry, we will be able to achieve those goals set out by your organization, perhaps all 17 of them.
No, that's great, and I think we're touching on what resilience is about here. It's about future-proofing and not necessarily immediate returns. Although a question I had, Gabrielle, for you specifically is, I think historically there's been an assumption that investing with ESG in mind it leads to kind of a reduction in returns. What's your view on that? I mean, obviously being savvy to access global markets and so on. What I mean, and having those conversations with investors, what's your sense around returns in particular?
I think it's a matter of perspective. I think the reason that stigma is there is because ESGs often get turned into CSR, and CSR then becomes simply just this additional thing on the P&L that a company has to pay for that doesn't have a direct return necessarily, other than a reputational one. And that's because we're not looking at the entire market as a whole, as a system. And when you turn an ESG into a CSR, you're missing the entire point that it's the consumers at the end which are actually driving behavior and choice and boardroom behavior and the way that our products are made. I think the realization that we're coming around to, or that I see the space coming around to, is the realization that that ESGs have to be manifested in terms of cost of goods and cost of services. At the end of the day, if this is ever to be sustainable, if this is ever to be anything, sustainability is ever to be anything other than ad hoc. And so the solutions to the negative impacts of consumption have to be built into the cost of the goods themselves, and without necessarily, and the upside being continued market access, right? The upside is brand building, brand recognition, brand leadership around transitioning to improve supply chains, and doing so in a way that's sustainable for the environment, sustainable for society, but also sustainable for the companies that are doing it themselves. It doesn't help the entire narrative if by meeting an ESG policy, a company loses shareholder value. It has to be done incrementally and built into cost of goods and cost of services. So I think that's this kind of mental transition that we're starting to see, and that's things like sustainable certification, things like zero deforestation commitments, things like science-based targets in carbon neutrality and even carbon negativity. All of this is beginning to flow in the same direction around that realization. We're starting to see that hit home. Yeah,
no, that's brilliant. And perhaps just to make it even more, sort of tangible for our audience, I was wondering whether you might be able to, and Sam, I'm going to come to you as well in a minute on a concrete example, but perhaps using the palm oil industry to illustrate, the changes that you see. Maybe one consumer good. How does that, so looking at the supply chain and how that has an impact to us, as individual day to day on our lives.
Sure, I'll give you 1.5 examples.
Okay, great.
So our first market transaction mechanism, which we created, was built out of the palm oil sector under the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. This was the idea that the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil obligates corporates or palm oil growers, which are trying to achieve RSPO or Sustainable Palm Certification. It obligates them to compensate financially for historical deforestation. So it's no longer sufficient just to grow palm according to certain standards, but if there is a loss of forest, that has to also be incorporated into the P&L. That P&L ends up moving its, that cost ends up moving its way down the supply chain. The problem is that out of 62 companies in the RSPO, the vast majority, almost all of them, had such environmental liabilities. And so you had an entire market segment there that needed to compensate for this deforestation via paying for another conservation project somewhere else, or landscape level offsetting, if you will, like carbon, but with entire ecosystems. And so we stepped in to create this mechanism that would make that easy, because it had to last for 25 years, right? So it's not just something you do and it's over, it's something you have to maintain for a quarter century. And that's a very perplexing concept to a company that's focused on palm oil, is to also have this entire other supply chain of environmental outcomes that you have to be accountable for. So Cargill was the first company to step into this mechanism with us, Cargill here in Singapore. And they helped us as an anchor development partner. And then we're the first company to come in and use this mechanism. Others have now subsequently stepped in and been also a part of this mechanism. So we handle financing now between those corporates and conservation projects. The second stage of the next iteration of this then is how do you build something like that, which is suitable for one company trying to meet a market requirement, but how do you build that for an entire supply chain, right? And how do you pick up different market segments along the way, growers, refiners, consumer goods manufacturers, and get them to agree that that they are all contributing to the problem of deforestation, of climate change, and get them then to all agree that this is a responsibility that should not just be on the shoulders of the grower, but it has to be just shared responsibility up and down the supply chain, and ultimately then be passed on to consumers. So our second mechanism is, which is being launched late. There will be a soft launch in late January, so stay tuned for that. And it will be involving a number of consumer goods companies, one of the main producer refiners, and over time, I hope a thriving ecosystem of growers that will be coming into it. And so we'll be looking to try to capture the entire supply chain there.
That's awesome. Thanks for the heads up. We're looking forward to that. And Sam, I'm going to come to you around decarbonization, but and then I think we have a few more minutes. I'd like to open up to the floor. Not only just virtually, sadly, we just use the Q&A. There's been a few questions posted. We won't be able to answer everything, but perhaps a quick one there, Sam, before I open up. Do you have a decarbonization target? Like, how do you participate, towards that? Perhaps as Singapore as a country. I mean, what's your sense on the decarbonization targets?
I think the CFO Taskforce principles goes from measuring to actually reporting, and we obviously have done the measurement part, and we have and our business is fundamentally zero carbon as a start, and I think we are not obviously happy just satisfied with just the supply side of the equation, where we are just a developer and a supplier of renewable energy. I think we are reaching out to establish the demand base for sustainability of this supply and demand of green energy. And in terms of concrete examples, we're happy to say that we are helping an Australian bank to create an online platform for their own customers to meet the to buy and sell demand of green energy in Australia. We before Amazon publicly talk about the RE1, the 100 objectives to be buying green energy. We actually have secured a year ago one of the largest Asia Pacific corporate PPA. Understanding that it is at the ultimately, as much as supply side is responsible, we wanted to make sure that we have the demand side of the pool for sustainability of this green energy. And I think third, in Taiwan, for example, we turn our asset base to actually a environmentalist centric and educational centric place for the old and young to visit and learn about the green energy. So from that angle, I think we wanted to make sure that we connect the dots from procurement to production, and we want to connect from supply to demand, and we want to obviously do the measurement part to the reporting part in being transparent and being proud of what we are aiming to do, which is zero carbon as an outcome.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam, for those points. So thanks both of you. I mean, we're not quite over yet. We have a few more minutes, and we have like more than 8 or 10 questions, sort of at the moment. So we're not going to be able to cover all of them, but there are two I think are particularly relevant. I know some are specific, kind of to you, Gabriel, around reforestation. So perhaps that's great if you're able to answer that online as we speak. But because we have such a wide range, diverse group of representatives from various countries on the panel, I think there are a few questions, sort of linked to creating the right structure and infrastructure, for emerging or developing countries to promote sustainable finance. So do you have any thoughts around that? And I know, of course, Singapore is not in that category, but for other people on the call who are, sort of calling us from Pakistan, Myanmar, and other places, any views, sort of maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, let's keep it short, that you might share around, sort of what can be done on sustainable finance specifically in those developing countries? It's a tricky one, because of course, in terms of the question was around whether institutions, can actually provide sufficient legal framework for sustainable finance in developing countries and emerging countries. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, I can start adding, but love to kind of hear whether sort of Gabriel, you perhaps work as well in other countries than just Singapore.
Yeah, sorry, I was just answering the participant's question on reforestation offsets. So can you pose that one more time?
100%. So what do you think is needed for developing countries to promote sustainable finance and ensure that the infrastructure is there more for that to happen, or the linkages between what we're talking about, because we have quite a lot of countries, not countries, but people from those countries joining up and asking those questions. And then the other question, which is more related to what we were discussing about the link between commitment and implementation as well. So perhaps we can close on that, but some thoughts around sort of emerging and developing countries would be great too.
Sure. So, I mean, in the land use space, it's more complicated than renewables, right? Because you're dealing with land tenure, you're dealing with indigenous rights, you're dealing with many aspects. And I think the most important thing that developing countries can do, in particular, I'm looking at Laos, Indonesia, parts of other Malaysia, is understand that initiatives on the ground, which used to be only the providence of donor financing and philanthropic financing, now have the ability to actually participate in the supply and demand dynamic with the market. But they're only able to do that to the extent that they are licensed to do so and that they have the rights to do so. So regulation and governance around different types of ecosystem services is extremely important if you're to have an enabling environment for transactions. In letting beyond just the ability to transact, seeing that those projects are now able to transact, and that there's a structured demand market for them through corporate supply chains, means that there's now an investment opportunity that can be made. It's not necessarily it's investments into conservation initiatives, for example. Previously, invest in expecting a return out of putting $5 million into a 20,000 hectare reforestation project, if you weren't going to use that for timber, it was absolutely impossible. That's now absolutely possible. And so it's about seeing things which have been historically finance receiving, actually now return generating as well.
That's great. Thanks, Gabriel. Sam, I think final words, because we are at the top of the hour already. So sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I will say that based on my experience in renewable energy and in water and in infrastructure, there are plenty of money chasing for good projects. And when a project is future proofing and sustaining with the principles, with the objectives of doing well and doing good in mind, I believe that you just have to bring that ideas and behind a risk and reward, a good allocation of risk and reward public and private partnership platforms, and there'll be multilateral, bilateral funding that would be looking and chasing for this type of projects that is sustainable and that is aligned with principles. So in my role as a task force, CFO task force, I look to contributing to ideas in bilateral and multilateral funding platforms to help the emerging as well as the developed countries in Asia Pacific.
That is brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop on that. That was great. I can't thank you enough for joining us, and sharing your knowledge. I think we've had very positive feedback from participants. I know there were many more questions, so we could have had another hour, and maybe not right now, but another time for sure. We will do more of those. So this is the beginning. I will pass on to my colleague Simia to just close very briefly. And thank you very much, Sam and Gabriel, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marie, Marika, Sam, and Gabriel for sharing your insights. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. To learn more about the UN Global Compact Sustainable Finance work, you may reach out to us and check out our website for the CFO Task Force for the SDGs. And to download the report that Marika shared with us, please scan the QR code to download the report, Closing the SDG Financing Gap in ASEAN. If you'd like to learn more about the UN Global Compact, please feel free to email me or reach out to the team. Our contact information is shown on the screen. And you'll also receive a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to review the recording of today's webinar. And on behalf of the UN Global Compact and our presenters, thank you very much for joining us and hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.